From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, a nonprofit public policy action organization which sponsors Conservative Roundtable. We're delighted to have as our guest for this broadcast of Conservative Roundtable a man for whom I have a very high regard, a friend of long standing, Larry Pratt. Larry is the head of a group called Gun Owners of America, a group of which I'm a life member. I don't know if they have that in the records, but I did pay the life membership fee.
We appreciate that.
Larry, what is the difference between Gun Owners of America and other pro-gun organizations?
The biggest difference is not the ultimate objective, but it's the idea that the standard lobbying model is to just accept the system as a given. You've got to have access, got to be willing to make some compromises, got to support people you really don't like, but hey, they're the ones in power. And so that's the one model. Ours was, always has been, no, the system is a mess and it needs to be cleaned up. And the way you do that is not only to push for the rollback of stuff that shouldn't have been ever put on the books, but also go after the players. And so in the last election, last year, 2010, when the NRA was giving $4,950 to Harry Reid, we were endorsing Sharon Angle in the primary.
Good for you.
And she's, of course, remained the candidate all the way through. Might have actually won the election, but when the SEIU, the Service Employee International Union, keeps the ballot boxes, then there could be a question or two. In the House, there were a whole slew, over 50 blue dogs, 3 of whom you could say were pro-gun. All the rest had voted anti-gun. NRA had endorsed them all. We went in and...
NRA is the National Rifle Association.
Not the National Recovery Act, yes.
Right.
So for those that know their FDR history. So, yeah, we endorsed some 30 that we thought, well, if they win, we're not going to be embarrassed. And almost all of them won. And the exciting thing about it was that when we had a chance to talk to Cantor in a campaign
This is
stop.
Eric Cantor, who's now the Republican whip.
Actually, a majority leader.
Majority leader, I'm sorry. He was the whip.
He was a whip, and they create an extra spot when you're in the majority.
Right.
So, but the now majority leader we were talking to, and he was just aghast at these endorsements that had been made by our colleagues,
NRA.
By the NRA. And we explained that, well, look, what you're seeing here this year in the elections is what we have to deal with as an analog with legislation. And we gave him the example of Senator Tom Coburn, who's the chairman of the Second Amendment Caucus. He's from Oklahoma, and he's really just folks. And he was pushing, with our help, to get a measure which he ultimately succeeded in doing that would overturn the gun ban in national parks. They were afraid we didn't have the votes. They didn't want to do it. Let's not risk it. And he pushed it, and he got like 65 votes, which means even in Harry Reid's Senate, you win. And it was attached to a money bill that had come from the House, so it was a bill they really wanted. It was a horrible bill, but they had control of the agenda, so we knew that was going to the president's desk. And even in the House, they tried to water his measure down. He was so frustrated with that that publicly he said, as far as I'm concerned, GOA is the only gun lobby in Washington.
Who makes these decisions for NRA? Is it Wayne LaPierre? Is there a board? Who does it?
The staff.
And I've had personal experience backing up what you've said where...
Oh, yeah, these are just a couple of...
Where they've supported the pro-gun control candidate against an anti-gun control candidate.
Because, the pro-gun control is going to win. We're going to have to live with him. Well...
How do they make their decisions?
Kind of on that basis, and it's made not by the board, but by... well, not on a day-to-day basis by Wayne LaPierre, because he's running a very large operation, but Chris Cox, who used to work for a Blue Dog Democrat, is the head of the political division, the Institute for Legislative Action, and until recently, Cunningham was the, I'm trying to think of his first name, Chuck Cunningham,
Chuck.
was the the head lobbyist, and he's now been moved over to state affairs, and they brought back a...
But Cunningham is fairly tough, isn't he?
He had to follow orders.
Yep.
So...
Do you think things will change with Dave Keene taking over the NRA?
No, I don't think so. The NRA board is very tightly regulated by an inside clique, ultimately driven by the staff. With a board of 76 people,
wow,
there are state senates that are not that large, and they're a mess. Imagine 76 members of the board. So it's just an ungainly way to try to govern, and as a result, the staff has it made.
What is the worst piece of anti-gun legislation still extant, still on the books?
Gee, there's so many candidates. I would say the overall 1968 Gun Control Act, because of its assumption...
Was that McClure?
No, that was subsequent. He tried to amend a little part of it. But the 1968 Act said that when you buy a gun, you've got to declare that you're not a disabled background. And initially, it was just a declaration. But as so many other unconstitutional assertions of authority by the feds, years later they said, well, now we want an instant background check so that we can find out if you're telling the truth. And the instant background check, it turns out, doesn't reduce crime. So here we have this unconstitutional, me proving I'm innocent before I can exercise a constitutional right.
This goes back to what year, 68?
That was in, ultimately, it passed in 93.
But the initial version of it.
It was in, that's a good point. That thing was in for 12 years before it finally passed the following year. The Democrats, unlike the Republicans, most Republicans, had no problem losing. It didn't embarrass them a bit. It just gave them a set of notes on what targets they wanted to go after the next time. And they just kept coming until they finally wore the feckless Republicans down. And that was a great lesson in how you do things legislatively.
Well, you've got a great guy on your staff who understands how to work that.
In fact, he has come up...
His name is Mike Harman.
Mike Harman has come up with a way that would make it very politically palatable for the Republicans to look at the president and say, go ahead, shut the government down. We gave you a chance to avoid stopping the Social Security checks and stopping the veterans checks and stopping the interest payments, and you refused that when you shut the government down. So it was your decision to play chicken with the whole government expenditure rather than just so-called essential services being maintained.
What is now happening in the courts that threatens the right to keep and bear arms?
The decisions that came down overturning the D.C. gun ban and the Chicago gun ban, we were unhappy with the way they were lawyered. They were extremely specific to just the ban on the guns, and in the case of D.C., the requirement to store them in a safe. And there was nothing else about the whole licensing scheme. Well, after the D.C. case was decided, when they lawyered the Chicago case, they should have seen a little hint that Scalia was dropping in his decision for the majority, his opinion for the majority, because he said, we were not able to rule on licensing because counsel said he didn't have a problem with it, thus taking it off the table. Didn't have a problem with licensing? A pro-Second Amendment attorney? And Mr. Heller, who was being represented, was flabbergasted because he had no idea that his attorney would say something like that. It was really not well done.
That's a shame. Are there any upcoming cases that you're focusing upon?
We've been doing some appellate work in a number of areas. We're trying to, as we get a chance, push back these remaining areas, and we're trying to make the case, which we did in Chicago as well, that, look, don't make the decision that this is a protected right, a fundamental right, based on the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. That's a killer. The judges have gone in there and quite arbitrarily invented all kinds of levels of analysis that they can entertain so that they can make law. But if you use the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the 14th Amendment, that's just a reference to the fact that you got a constitutional right, and that right applies to everybody, no matter where they are in the country. And there's no clutter of all this judicial invention in that avenue. And Clarence Thomas presumably might have read our friend of the court brief, because his Heller opinion, his Chicago opinion, was as if we might have written it for him. We were delighted.
He does some great stuff,
Now,
doesn't he?
that was only 1 out of 9. And you said, well, what good is that? Well, several months later, a Wisconsin state judge had a man before him who had been carrying a concealed firearm. And the man said, sir, that's unconstitutional. And the judge said, well, according to what Justice Thomas said, you're right. So the law's out.
That's great. We have to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about how you're causing murder in Mexico. And I also want to talk about what the UN is up to and how it might affect U.S. policy. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Larry Pratt, who runs Gun Owners of America, the best Second Amendment organization in the country.
You are a defender of liberty. You spoke out.
That is part of your job.
You were heard in Congress.
No.
You marched. You created a new movement. You endured attacks.
You see folks waving tea bags around.
Now you can help to
Repeal the bill.
go to sendthematmessage.com. Print the pledge to repeal Obamacare. Send it to your representative, senators, and candidates to sign that they pledge to repeal the bill. Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill.
Repeal the bill.
Repeal the bill.
Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill.
Repeal the bill now. Go to sendthematmessage.com and help.
Repeal the bill.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors Conservative Roundtable. This broadcast and others, we're privileged to have as our guest the leader of the #1 organization in America which defends our right to keep and bear arms. Larry, there are some other things I'd like to get into, but is there any limit to the arms you can keep and bear? You can keep and bear a machine gun, but what about a tank? Hey, how do you answer that question?
There's 150 years of history of the word militia from colonial America. So when the word was put into Article 1, Section 8, and into the Second Amendment, everybody knew what that word meant, and we can know what it meant by just studying how the legislatures had handled militia.
So in other words, you had to be able to carry it.
Militia said you had to be a free man, typically between the ages of 17 and 44, and you had to have, in the earlier days, a blunderbuss. By the time of the Militia Act of 1792, the early republic, a military rifle, which today would be a fully automatic machine gun, assault weapon, if I can get the point across.
Sure.
And if you were summoned to duty, you had to come. Almost identical to what the Swiss are doing to this day.
And the Swiss just rejected an effort to restrict their right to keep and bear arms.
It was thrilling. 57% of the people, I was not convinced that they would do that because they've been wussified a lot in thinking about entering the rest of Europe and so forth. But they said, no, we like our machine guns at home.
Yep.
And
we
recently did a YouTube where I congratulated them and suggested that we ought to do the same thing, and we ought to give every man in this country who's between 17 and 44 a machine gun. And just the way the Swiss do it as well, if an old geezer like me wants to get a machine gun, military has to sell it to me.
Why should you have to have a permit for concealed carry?
You shouldn't. And 3 states have already said you don't need one. Wyoming is working hard on becoming the 4th state. They're getting close. It's passed the Senate, passed a committee in the House, and perhaps we'll have floor action as you and I are speaking. And there are other states where they're pushing on it as well, and that's the way it should go. I can further get back to your question about what kind of armament. The Militia Act of 1792, which I would say was really a federal codification of what the militia laws had been, said that you had to have that rifle and you had to bring it with you if you were summoned to militia. However, if you were in an artillery unit, you didn't have to bring the artillery, but you had to bring the rifle. So they were supposing that, well, you might own it, but that's not a requirement, the rifle.
Now, one of the ways the foes of gun ownership are proceeding at the moment is to restrict access to ammunition. What's happening on that front?
The EPA, shortly before the election, put up a proposed regulation that ammunition would almost, none of it could be lead. They were arguing that that lead is a pollutant, and actually lead can be a pollutant
if it's pollute the person you hit.
Well, that's one form, and the other is to cook it so that it starts to have vapors. Or if you're painting lead on a ship, men used to get lead poisoning that way. But a bullet, unless it's the particular pollution you referred to, if it just goes into a berm behind the target, it can have runoff water for a century, and nothing is going to happen.
What is the UN trying to do to us, and how is the Obama administration reacting?
Well, at least on the EPA, they saw that they had stuck their hand in a hornet's nest, and so they pulled back the regs that had been proposed. The UN, they have pledged to sit down with the thugocracy that really comprises the UN and commit to writing a treaty that they would subject the United States to, a gun control treaty. And I don't think that's likely to pass the Senate. But what is of concern is that they will fall back on this living constitution idea that operates in the international level called norming. Well, so many countries have now passed this gun control.
Law and blah, blah.
Yeah, it becomes international law. It's a norm of international law. And then you get another Obama administration, God forbid, sometime down the line, and they'll say, well, we just want to be good international citizens, and we want to... And I saw something like that get pulled in land rights area. There was a New Age gold mine being built 3-4 miles outside Yellowstone Park. Under our laws, as long as you're outside the 3-mile perimeter, you don't have to worry about it being a historical site or all that kind of nonsense. So this company had spent millions of dollars. They were about ready to go into operation, and the Clinton bureaucrats went to the UN and got the UN to declare it a World Heritage Site. That means 10 miles outside, I think, at least. Anyway, it was a gotcha. And we'd never signed on to the treaty that was being referenced, but they used it to cut a landowner's throat.
Now, what is the big deal about Mexico claiming the U.S. is responsible for murders in their country because of access to guns from U.S. dealers?
Well, there's 2 ways that guns, in truth, do get into Mexico. The biggest way, where they get fully automatic M16 Army military service rifles, machine guns, is through Mexican defectors. Some 150,000 have defected, and many of them, we imagine, took their gun with them and either sold it to the Zetas or actually joined the Zetas. The second largest source in the last year, anyway, has been the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. They have been instructing dealers who had questions. Should we be selling these multiple firearms to this one guy's name, I think it was Jaime Avila, something like that. And yeah, go ahead and say, we're just tracking it. Well, the guns walked across the border. And 2 of the guns that had been sold by an Arizona gun shop ended up at the scene of the crime where a Border Patrol agent was killed last December. And this is a huge scandal. Senator Grassley has told the BATF, I want a briefing on this. They initially tried to stonewall him and tried to further roll over on some of the agents that want desperately to be subpoenaed so that they can testify under the whistleblower law and enjoy those benefits. Right now, they're hanging out to dry. And we've already seen the agent that was in Mexico City who wanted to tell the Mexicans, told not to by his superior, and transferred to the United States.
One problem we have is that there are fewer gun shops. There are fewer places where one can purchase a weapon, and there's an effort to close down more dealers.
We can thank President Clinton for some 80% reduction in gun shops, and it was an essence of simplicity. They put an unconstitutional requirement in an otherwise unconstitutional bill that said, in effect, the BATF is the final zoning authority for any gun dealer. They require certification of zoning approval by a local authority, and so somebody that was operating out of his home, didn't have any particular traffic, then nobody had any idea probably the guy was there. All of a sudden he has to go apply, and he gets turned down because some lib in the local county city council says, oh no.
How many people do get turned down after background checks?
It's in the thousands. There's probably been some pushing 250,000. And if anybody thinks that the criminal said, oh, I can't get a gun.
Ah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like every other gun control law. It's based on the fiction. And I've begun to ask the support.
Criminals are law-obeying people.
So I've been suggesting to the gun grabbers lately, why don't you pass a law saying it's illegal to have an illegal gun?
Now, we have to take a break in a minute, but just tell me briefly about how military veterans are being penalized.
Oh, we might have to come back after the break, but briefly, they can lose their right to keep and bear arms without any trial, any due process, simply based on a psychiatric evaluation that could be viewed as you might be of danger to self or others. Well, you may not want the guy having a gun if that were the case, but there's a forum for that. It's called a court of law where all the protections of due process are supposed to protect us.
Larry, we have to take a break, and when we come back, Larry Pratt will tell you how you can provide support to the work that's being done to defend our right to keep and bear arms. We'll be right back with Larry Pratt.
Hey, listen, this is the greatest thing. I want to tell you something. Something's happening in this country. And I want to tell you, look around my friends here. My friends here in Washington, come over here. See all these great people? These great folks are here because they want to take the country back to the direction of the Founding Fathers and stop all this nonsense that's going on and stop this, this immersion into socialism, which is happening. We've got to stop it. And every day we're losing a little bit of our freedom. But the answer is that the individual citizens can make a difference. They can walk through these houses of Congress. They can look their congressman in the eye and say, hey, vote this bill down. Get rid of it. We got a lot of work to do. And the first thing we have to do is get rid of the garbage and the attacks on our freedoms. This is it. So anyway, that's what these guys are doing here today to do. Yes! And I say, all of you guys out there, with the sound of my voice and the visual that this great gentleman has created, get down here and do your responsible citizenship by going and seeing your representatives and telling them, what you want, because this is your house. It's not their house. Yeah. Get in there and tell them what to do, and let's begin cleaning this country up. A big mess has been created in only a year's time, in 9 months' time, really. A big mess we have to recover from. We got to start work. We got to throw some people out. So anyway, I love this country. I love you. Go do your job. Thank you for your help. Thank you.
Welcome back. If you are interested in the kinds of issues we discuss on Conservative Roundtable, please send your contact information to the Conservative Caucus. Our fax is 703-281-4108, or you can write to us at 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia 22180. No cost or obligation. We'd be delighted to send you information on a whole variety of issues. It's been a real pleasure having Larry Pratt with us. Larry, how do people get in touch with you?
Easiest way is to go to our website. Hopefully people can do that, and that's gunowners.org. We would urge them, well, we'd love to have them join and become a paid member, but if they want to just start out by getting our bulletins, our email bulletins, that's really where a lot of fast action things happen. So sign up for them at gunowners.org, and if you can't get on the web, we have a toll-free number, 888-888-6GUNS. That's 888-886, and then GUNS.
I'm on the mailing list of more than one Second Amendment organization, and I have to say yours is the one that sends relevant, timely information on which action can and should be taken, and I really appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate that because we know you know what goes on and how things have to work in Washington, and so I appreciate you saying that.
Well, Gun Owners of America is a great organization, and I hope all of you will check it out and see if it's something with which you'd like to become engaged. The defense of our right to keep and bear arms is very, very important. And as long as you have a populace which is armed, there are limits on the tyranny which could be advanced by the government. Thanks so much for watching us. Larry, thank you for being with us.
Good to be with you.
Keep up the good work.